OPB Podcasts.
From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Thursday, August 28th. Lawmakers will be back in Salem Friday to consider a proposal that would help stave off layoffs for hundreds of transportation workers. But it would also raise taxes at a time when a lot of Oregonians are already hurting financially. Does this sound familiar? Yes, we have been here before. But this time, Governor Tina Kotek said she's confident lawmakers will approve a transportation package that will raise billions for the state's roads. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
And I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
Dirk, let's do what we do at the top of these podcasts. Remind all the people who have fuller, more robust lives than we do how we got here. And I'm going to say something that I don't tell you often, but, don't spare the details. Don't be brief. Get into the entire long 6-month session that just happened where we were discussing this very thing and then pivot into how it all blew up.
Wow. An absolute first here on Politics Now. I will try to be brief, Lauren. I can sense the subtext in the question. Democrats, when they came into the session in January, knew that a transportation package was going to be a major goal. For months already, a legislative committee had been touring the state. They were working up ideas for how to actually fundamentally change the paradigm of how we fund transportation in the state. The problem was, as we talked about a lot in the podcast, they took a long time getting to their sort of final draft on this thing. There was less than 3 weeks left in session by the time leading Democrats unveiled their proposal. There was instantly a lot of questions about whether the taxes they were proposing were the right taxes. There was huge questions about how much it was going to cost Oregonians because, frankly, even when this bill was getting a public hearing, we didn't know how much it was going to cost Oregonians. That's how sort of slapdash this all felt. And so maybe it's not a surprise that with so little runway that they left themselves, Democrats didn't have the votes. Republicans were against this thing almost universally. And then some key Democrats, particularly Senator Mark Meek, were registering concerns. That made it so on June 27th, the last day of session, it became clear this bill did not have the votes to pass the Senate. Everything went into chaos. Tina Kotek comes to the legislature to start trying to hammer out deals. Democrats try to throw this final, Band-Aid bill at the very end that Republicans shake their heads and say they're not going to let move forward. So we don't have a transportation package. This session ends in sort of embarrassing fashion, frankly, for the Dems who are trying to put this forward. But then right away we have a problem, right? Which is that part of this bill was to get ODOT through a big funding hole that it said it has. And so the second this thing failed, the session gavels out, we are all of a sudden hearing about hundreds of people being laid off at ODOT, 10% of their employees being laid off. 12 maintenance stations going dark. Let me just read from you a list that ODOT has been providing folks about what's at stake or what people can expect if nothing happens with transportation funding. They say fewer snowplows, more potholes, more snow and ice on major roads, longer traffic closures because maintenance teams need to travel from farther away, more trash and graffiti, slower response to crashes and other incidents, closed rest areas. That's their abbreviated list. Not things that many Oregonians would want to see. Governor Kotek was adamant that this could not stand. Democrats decided pretty quickly they can't live with that. She calls a special session, and here we are. We will gavel in tomorrow.
Okay, you gave us a lot of information there.
Yes, I did.
Let's put a finer point on why, after 6 months of working on this, or trying to work toward this anyway,
right,
they feel confident that this time it is going to come together in a matter of days.
The Dems have pivoted here. This bill, it's called LC2, I think still, Legislative Concept 2. This is a smaller bill. It is about half the size in terms of the revenue raised of that big Democratic proposal that failed in the session. And, I think Democrats felt they were very, very close at the end of the session. But for maybe Senator Mark Meek or winning over some R's or maybe having a little more time to answer some questions, they felt like they could have been there if not for a couple asterisks. So what they've done now is they've got a smaller bill, and they've also introduced some things designed to win over specific constituencies within this thing. So, there is something that obliterates tolling language in the state statute that Mark Meek had really been upset about. That seems like it's going to win him over. There are tax structure changes for heavy trucks that the trucking industry had been really adamant about. That's now got them on board, and that can be important in terms of winning over Republicans. So that's a big thing. There's some nods to enviros. I mean, they are really trying to do some things to pull in some key groups and have the momentum for this thing to pass.
Typically, a special session is a relatively drama-free affair. I mean, the votes have been whipped, they've been counted, and the policy has been hashed out. Lawmakers come in and come out more or less having quickly voted for this policy package. But already it feels like there is just some more consternation surrounding this special session.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we are seeing is like a basic disagreement in the parties about whether this session is necessary at all, right? I mean, so you are right. So case in point, last year, a typical special session is maybe like last year when lawmakers needed to come together to put a bunch more money to pay for our huge record-setting wildfire season. Like, everyone knew we had to pay our wildfire bills. There was very little controversy about coming in for a single day, dumping a bunch more money into the kitty for that, making sure people got paid. Or some of the sessions during COVID, right? There was, I think, 3 special sessions during COVID. Like, people understood that there were emergencies that needed to be addressed. This is different. Like I said, the two parties fundamentally disagree in some ways about the direction of this bill. Democrats are saying more revenue is necessary. Let's make sure ODOT doesn't have all this bloodletting. Let's make sure cities and counties have money to fix their roads. Republicans are saying Dems are just not thinking creatively enough. And that is where the sort of conflict comes in. And what that is doing actually is creating some really interesting questions about the logistics. Frankly, frustrating for me as someone who's getting ready to work for a weekend. Because what Democrats want to do here is have a 2-day session, essentially. They would like the House to convene on Friday, take up the bill, vote on the bill. Saturday and Sunday, we'd all be hanging out and cooking out whatever people are doing for Labor Day. And then the Senate would come in on Monday, take up the bill, vote it out. That would be it. But that is, as you know, an expedited process that needs Republican buy-in. You need 2/3 vote in each chamber to waive the normal procedural rules. And Republicans are saying, we're not going to do that. We are not going to facilitate you guys passing a tax hike that we have no interest in. So unfortunately for me, unfortunately for legislative aides, unfortunately for some lawmakers, like, this is looking like it could drag out it could drag out to Wednesday. I won't walk you through every jot and tittle of it, but this could drag out to Wednesday. And we just don't know. Honestly, we just don't know.
Well, let's talk about all the jot and tittles. Let's really dig into the details. The big package that failed during the long session had pretty significant tax increases and raised a variety of other fees and would have created something like $12 billion over a decade.
Yep.
That imploded because, like you've just detailed, both members of both parties really took some issue with it. How much of that original package is still on the table?
Yeah, so like I said, it is about half of that $12 billion package. The analysis we heard last week was this is going to raise $5.8 billion over a decade. And here's a quick breakdown. There is a lot that was in the big bill, and there's a lot that's been stripped away. So what we are looking at now is a 6-cent hike to the gas tax, which is currently at 40 cents per gallon. Titling and registration fees that are roughly doubling, or in some cases more, for folks. The doubling of this payroll tax that we all pay out of our paychecks. It is currently 0.1%. It will be 0.2%. And that money all goes to transit districts, public transit districts, who say they are really having some financial difficulties right now and may have to cut services. Then there's also a program that is going to eventually require all EV drivers and all hybrid drivers to pay for every mile they drive, as opposed to having some increased fees, but maybe not paying as much into the system as some people would like. So that's the big revenue piece of this. There's a lot more, I mentioned some tolling stuff, some trucker stuff. There's a whole bunch, but in terms of like the things that are really going to have Oregonians' attention, I think it is those revenue raising pieces.
There seems to be an understanding right now even among Democrats, that it is not a great time to raise taxes. I mean, I think even people who sometimes would otherwise be open to raising taxes if there was like a great need for a public service, you know, Portlanders often do. I've been hearing even from Portlanders and a lot of people testified in Salem this week that it's a hard time to think about adding more to the, you know, taking away their income.
Yeah.
Have you been hearing that from people who testified?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple brands of testimony, right? There's a couple flavors of it. There's the testimony that is in front of lawmakers in the legislative committee, and that can be a little bit choreographed. So there was a hearing on this bill on Monday, and we saw relative parity, honestly, between like local officials, mayors, who really want to see a lot more money and feel like their roads departments are being bled or you know, starved and so support this. And then folks who are very adamant that this is too much. But again, like you can only see so much in a legislative hearing. I think we should also note that a ton of written testimony was filed with the legislature for that bill. And I think, you know, last I checked, the vast majority of these thousands and thousands of written letters were against it. And some of it are just like, no new taxes, very simple. Some people are making pleas saying this is going to present real difficulties for their situations or force them to work more or whatever. So there's a bunch of different positions there. But yeah, I think the sense lawmakers should be getting, at least from those snapshots, is that there are some real concerns out there about this.
So you mentioned that this package is significantly less than what was originally proposed during the long session. That begs the question, does that mean that they will be taking up another transportation package in coming sessions?
So I think that feels like the intent, and I just don't think we can say anything definitive right now. But certainly some groups are talking like that. So, for instance, we heard from the League of Oregon Cities this week saying they support this package, but they will look forward to coming back for an even more, I think what they would say is holistic proposal in the 2027 session, fund some things that got stripped out. I mean, there are, I think, plenty of people that liked what they saw in this big Democratic bill and sort of were heartbroken to see it slip away, and so probably want to revive those discussions. And let's note, there are huge unfunded things that were stripped out of that. So the Democratic bill had a bunch of money for these big mega highway projects that the state has started or intended to do and finds itself way short of the funding on. And so there was going to be some effort to close the funding gap on those, and that's now gone. And there's huge question marks about how we're going to pay for those. So I think that is a discussion that's waiting for another day. I mean, you know, I think the question is going to be, though, how palatable is this, right? In 2027, we'll be past an election, so maybe people feel like they have a little more room to breathe and take up some of these questions. But things change, and these are very turbulent times. So are we thinking a lot about transportation in 2027, or are our tensions elsewhere, right?
Let's shift away for a moment from the policy and to the people, because there's been a lot of talk about the hundreds of people who will be laid off at Oregon Department of Transportation if this doesn't pass. What do you know about those roles or who those people are? Yeah,
I mean, they have a breakdown that ODOT has offered about where they are within the agency structure. So I think the largest group of these are maintenance workers, the folks that stripe your roads or fill your potholes or plow your roads. I mean, those kinds of things that ODOT is saying will not be done. I think like the largest single group is that. But there's also big cuts in positions responsible for completing highway projects, project planners. There's big cuts in the administration of ODOT as well. You know, those are the people who actually are in jobs today and stand to lose their jobs. What ODOT is saying, though, is that if this goes through, the impact is bigger than that, because there are also hundreds of vacant positions within ODOT that, you know, some folks would be happy to just remain vacant. But all told, if some more money isn't found, ODOT is saying it will be down about 1,000 positions between vacancies and people actually losing their jobs. It's pretty dramatic.
The other big person in all of this is obviously the governor, Governor Tina Kotek. And after the end of the long session, we were both hanging out in the House chamber late into the night. And the governor was very actively trying to negotiate this package right up until adjournment. And that was sort of noteworthy because she hadn't been at least visibly present in the transportation package talks up until that point. I mean, I think she took issue with that a little bit, but that was the outside perspective. How involved has she been this time around?
Yeah, I just want to say about the only person I have spoken with about whether the governor was involved in the transportation package who says that they have been involved was Kotek. Like virtually every other person you talk to in the legislature says she was very hands off, but she would argue she had been checking in and making sure things were on schedule. Anyway, I think we can say very clearly that the governor has been instrumental and really the one pushing this since the session failed. She has been the one that's been working to sort of get folks in line. Obviously, she called the session. Her office has been working to put together this package and also has been working to try to figure out. We assume that there are the 3/5 votes in each chamber to pass it. Here is what she said when she called the special session about what that work has looked like.
I'm not complaining, but the minute the session ended, I canceled all my plans, as did some of my team, and we have been working on this nonstop with folks.
She took real issue, as you'll remember, Lauren, with the fact that Democrats adjourned the session without passing a transportation package, suggested she was not pleased. And so she has been involved.
She suggested everybody cancel their August vacation plans.
Yes.
And now nobody will be barbecuing this weekend.
Yeah, now we're working on Labor Day. So cool.
The discussion so far has really been about how much money to raise to get the Oregon Department of Transportation where it needs to be.
Yep.
But there are some voices, mostly Republican, but not all, who just think that's the wrong question, who think ODOT has enough money.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans have been saying all year, since before the session, the question about ODOT funding should not be about finding new revenue, but figuring out what they're spending on that is incorrect or, focusing their mission a little more clearly on what it should be, which is nuts and bolts road maintenance and making sure everyone can get from A to B. So, we did see a couple, I guess, substantive proposals from Republicans over the course of the session. About how they would do that. And they basically revolved around taking money that goes to things like public transit. That was a big one. Bike and pedestrian projects, helping people pay for EVs to switch over to electric vehicles, rerouting all those things toward maintenance. And a couple things on that, right? The first is these are proposing defunding things that Democrats like that kind of proposal was always going to be a non-starter with a lot of Democrats, and I think Republicans knew that. But the second thing is I am not sure, and I was going over before we recorded this, it didn't look to me like any of the proposals the Republicans had were going to be enough to actually find enough money to fill the budget hole for ODOT and also get money to the cities and counties that I think a lot of people acknowledge is necessary. So I'm not sure that those refunding priorities would have got us where we wanted to be to the point where there wouldn't be new revenue necessary anyway. But that was the Republican talking point. It still will be. And you're right. It is not just Republicans making this case. Actually, some very liberal people, groups like No More Freeways, which opposes highway widening projects and doesn't want us dedicating more space to cars, that is just going to enable more driving. They really argue that ODOT has been very irresponsible with millions and billions of dollars in these huge highway projects. They're paying ungodly amounts to consultants. They never come in under budget or even on budget, and that we really need to be pulling money away from these huge projects and putting it towards some of the things we're talking about now, which is, again, it's nuts and bolts road maintenance.
Let's get to the politics of all of this for a little bit. How do you see this playing out politically for the Democrats? I mean,
it feels like there are risks on both sides here, kind of, because, on the one hand, Democrats control everything, right? They run the state. I don't think they want to oversee the kinds of massive cuts at ODOT, the kind of service reductions we were talking about earlier. I mean, that is the kind of thing that is just going to lead folks to suggest that this is a state that is not being governed responsibly. So that is one problem for them. The other option, though, is, as we're talking about, it's raising taxes. And as we've said, that is something that is likely not going to be popular with a lot of people. We saw the thousands of pieces of testimony that were against this. And I just think there is a risk that if they do pass this, and I think Democrats have every expectation they are going to pass this bill. This is going to show up in next year's elections. This is going to be a potent weapon. And so that's the risk. Kotek has made clear, though, she wants this done. She has staked her claim. That's where she wants to be. So,
speaking of elections, there is a chance that we see another gubernatorial matchup between House Republican leader Christine Drazan and Governor Tina Kotek. They have obviously faced each other before, and they're probably both thinking in the back of their heads how this would game out politically for them if they face each other again. So same question about Republicans. How do you see this politically playing out for them?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke with someone who is engaged in Republican politics earlier this week or last week, and they were saying they actually think this bill, which they expect will pass, is going to be key to Republicans' hopes next year. This is something that is going to come up in legislative races. This is going to likely come up in the gubernatorial race, regardless of who runs against Kotek, assuming she runs again, which we expect. So, Governor Tina Kotek passed billions of dollars in tax hikes for you, or Representative A passed billions of dollars in tax hikes for you. I mean, it's a very salient argument that you can expect Republicans are going to make. And so, I think we'll be talking about this a lot. And I just think we won't avoid this for a while.
There's another campaign, too, that could play out because of all of this. I mean, what do we know about the chances that this bill just gets referred to voters?
Yeah, so this is a big sort of unspoken factor here. You probably remember, Lauren, earlier this year, Democrats were teeing up that big bill, and there was this campaign bubbling up with real momentum that would have referred the bill to voters if it passed. Car dealers had kicked in a lot of money, I think almost $200,000 to collect signatures. That money was ultimately returned when the bill didn't pass, but that doesn't mean that if this bill passes in the special session, there won't be real momentum to collect a bunch of signatures. I think it's like 78,000 that you have to collect in 3 months in order to kick this to voters. I spoke actually with Senator Bruce Starr this week. He was one of the folks involved with the signature gathering campaign during the session. I asked him, what are the chances he gets involved again? Here is what he said.
Ultimately, it's up to Oregon voters, to decide where they are going to be on a bill that's going to pass with virtually only Democrat votes. So do Oregonians support the direction of the Democrats and the governor in the state, or don't they?
I think Starr was being a little cagey with me, frankly. He wouldn't say definitively if he expects a signature gathering campaign, who he expects to be involved. He didn't want to delve into those things. But let's note that if this were to be sent to voters, I think we would have good reason to expect it would go down in flames. The last time a gas tax hike was proposed on the ballot was in 2000. It was opposed by 87% of voters. Democrats will tell you candidly they think if this thing lands on the ballot, it is dead in the water. So the question will be whether or not some of the work Kotek has done to get the truckers on board, for instance, win over some constituencies, is enough to defang a signature gathering campaign.
While we were recording this, an email just popped into my inbox.
I saw that. Yes, I haven't had a chance to read it.
House Republican leader Christine Drazan and Senate Republican leader Daniel Bonham are going to have a press conference tomorrow where they unveil their own transportation package that will preserve jobs, they say, and not raise taxes, which is just another signal that, unlike most special sessions where the votes are whipped and everybody is in agreement, we do not have that this one.
Well, and my question is, how is it different from the bill that they proposed during the session? I was just going over that. Like I said, it's reroute money from public transit, reroute money from what they would call climate change spending, and put that into nuts and bolts maintenance. Do they have radically new ideas, or is this just sort of reshuffling? I guess we'll find out tomorrow. I can't wait.
Tomorrow. It's going to be a great Labor Day weekend for you, Dirk. Before we go, should we just touch quickly on something that will not be taken up on the special session, but that lawmakers are going to have to deal with sooner or later?
Yes.
We learned this week that the state's general fund revenues are going to be down quite a bit. Yeah.
So just yesterday, we got the latest revenue forecast. These are these things that everyone looks at because it gives us a sense of where our budget sits, how our economy is going. And this one was expected to be bad. It was bad. I mean, maybe not as bad as some people were hoping, but expecting. What the economists said is, because of this huge, big, beautiful bill passed by Congress that contains all these tax cuts for your and I federal taxes, the state of Oregon's general fund is going to be hurt. And that's because the state of Oregon automatically adopts changes to the federal tax code when it decides what Oregonians owe in state taxes. And so the fact that Trump and the Republicans cut a bunch of taxes on the federal level actually means tax cuts for us on our state taxes as well. That is going to blow a hole in the budget. When lawmakers passed this budget in June, they set aside about $500 million that was just kind of insurance money. If things were going crazy, they would have $500 million to throw at the problem. What the state economist Carl Riccadonna said yesterday is that now all that money is essentially gone. In fact, he's expecting around a $373 million hole in this brand new budget. There's a lot of time left in this biennium. The numbers will go up and down, but if things stand like this, we are going to face another very interesting problem, Lauren, which is are Democrats going to try to close this hole by saying, all right, we are going to disconnect from this federal tax code. We're going to essentially paper over that hole. It shouldn't have been there in the first place. Let's do away with that. Like, that is a tricky vote to take on the heels of taking a potentially $5.8 billion tax hike. I mean, I just think they are going to find themselves in some politically tricky places. We don't know that they'll try that, but the sense I have gotten from Dems is that is something they will think very seriously about.
We will dig into that in another podcast because they're going to kick us out of the studio here on this one. So let's leave it there today. Dirk, thank you so much for all the information.
Oh, thank you, Lauren.
This week's episode of OPB Politics Now was recorded in the Gert Boyle studio. It was produced by Andrew Thien, and our audio engineer is Nalene Silva. Our music comes from Audio Network. In these uncertain times, we are certain you have questions about local politics. Maybe we can answer them. We would love to hear from you. Seriously, try it. Email us at opbpoliticsnow@opb.org. We will be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.